Hot snacks in the foyer, eh? Mm. Hot snacks in the foyer, eh? It's come back to me now.
Okay. All right, everybody. Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to the latest edition of Kaizen Central. It's a great pleasure to see everybody. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And to anybody watching on YouTube, it is now live and all going swimmingly. I hope you've all had a terrific week. I was just talking to Simon, who of course is in Washington, DC, where life is extraordinarily difficult. He was just explaining actually that nothing can get done if the president does not, what is it, Simon, if he doesn't concede and put in place the transition, then effectively it gums up anything that business is trying to do.
Yeah, he doesn't actually have to concede. What he has to do is he has to accept that Biden is going to be president and that the formal process of transition can start taking place, which means a combination of things. Firstly, they get access to some budget and they get access to some office premises downtown. But more importantly, it means that they then have formal permission to talk to all of the other agencies of government. So at the moment, they're not allowed to. So from a COVID perspective, for example, all of the people at the National Institutes of Health, the FDA, CDC, they're not allowed to talk to the Biden transition team. At a national security level, Biden is not currently receiving the daily briefing. And the Trump administration has essentially told everybody to not cooperate. How long this will go on, who knows? But at the moment, it means that fairly important plans aren't being put in place.
Wow. Yeah, so as I think I mentioned, I was in Washington in 2000 when we went through that long, dark night of the soul after Bush Gore. But it never got to this level of madness, insanity, and it was crazy, but it wasn't that crazy. We all thought it was at the time. We never thought it could be bettered or worsted, but it has been. Anyway, hello everybody. The members hub page is there. I hope you've all been able to log in. Ram was saying he had a slight issue. So I'm very sorry about that. If anybody has, but if you could see the page, and then you know who everybody is. But I think everybody is familiar with people on the screen at the moment. Good to see Richard Hagan again. Hello, Richard. He's just been nominated as an exemplar in the Manufacturer Top 100, for which.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. It's absolutely wonderful to be in the top 100. I'm just driving up to Glasgow at the moment. I don't care COP26 has been cancelled. I'll be shouting action needs to be taken this year. So I'm staying up for 4 days as a film industry, as a video recorder. So I'll be listening most of the time because I am driving. But thank you very much, Peter.
Well, that's quite all right. And I must say that having last year been responsible for putting the thing together, the top 100, when I was at the manufacturer, I know just how important it is. And we had a fantastic celebration this time last year when we were able to be live in Liverpool. Just to repeat, I have left the manufacturer now, but this was last year when I was still with them. And it means so much for individual manufacturers to get recognition like this. It's really superb. So I just thought it was great news to see that Richard had been made an exemplar. That means he's in the top 20% of the top 100. So everybody, I posited the concept of the paradoxical mindset as a topic for discussion wondering if leaders could use it, or maybe if leaders even have it, but understand it and use it to provoke sort of quantum levels of innovation in their businesses. I'm going to, I haven't warned him about this, but I'm going to ask Bob Gibbon if he knows the phrase, the paradox mindset, because you work very much in the field of leadership and theories such as this. Does it mean anything to you, Bob?
Yeah. Whether I believe it is another thing. So the paradox says that you can't have one thing if it opposes another thing. And therefore, how do you balance between the two? And my point is, the paradox only exists within the confines of an existing paradigm. And therefore, if you work to bust the paradigm, you bust the paradox. So most people would look at resolving a paradox through compromise. And I'd say, stuff that, resolve the paradox by busting the paradigm to get to a far more powerful solution. So it exists, but it doesn't need to exist, if that makes sense.
Well, you had me, then you didn't, then you had me, then you lost me again. I wonder if you could give me an example of that in operation.
Okay, so there is a thing called the theory of constraints that some people might be familiar with, and a model within the theory of constraints is a thing called an evaporating cloud. An evaporating cloud is a systemic or systematic tool for managing, eliminating paradox. So it says, what's the core thing you're trying to do in which the paradox exists? So let's say we want to serve customers at minimum cash levels. So if I want to serve customers, I'm going to need a ton of stock. If I want minimum cash, I'm going to need a minimum amount of stock. I can't have a ton of stock and a minimum amount of stock. My assumption on that is I need a ton of stock to create good customer service. So if I then start looking at the assumptions behind that, so why is that seen as a truth? Well, because I get minimum order quantities from my suppliers, and therefore I have to hold a certain amount of stock. There's a huge lead time from some suppliers, so I've got to do that. I don't know what my demand pattern is, so I've got to hold stock for the variability of demand. So I've got a variability of supply, a variability of demand. I've got a ton of stock. Now, it might be that in reality, if I looked at the maths of it, on an 80-20 basis, probably only 20% of that stock is what's really messing me up. But we work on heuristics in business mostly, not on science. So we'll go for a simple solution. We'll bump our stock up. Now, if I could have better customer service, I might be able to grow my business, say from 15 million pounds to 17 million pounds. And that extra 2 million pounds, I might get 1.2 million profit out of that. But I might have to chuck a whole bunch more money into stock. But if I look at it and realize on an 80-20 basis, I only need to chuck more stock in on 20% of it, and that stock is really only 60% of my 15 million, because that's what the cost of purchased goods is, then I only need to increase 20% of 9 million, 1.8 million. Let's round it up to 2 million quid's worth. Now, if I could get 1.2 million pounds worth of extra profit by better service, but I don't want to increase my stock, what if I increased the 20% of the stock? What would that be? Well, an alternative to that would be, why don't I find a supplier who can deliver it faster, much more reliably? And what if he charged me 10% more? I'm going to pay £200,000 for that. I'm going to get 1.2 million pounds profit. So by busting the paradigm and paying more money for my supplies on the critical products, I eliminate the paradox and I get much, much more money. So I get more sales, 17 million from 15 million, more profit, 3.2 from 2 or 3 million, because I've pay 200,000 out to the supplier instead of 2 million, and my profitability goes up as well, because instead of having 2/15ths, I've now got 3/17ths. Win-win all round.
So basically, it sounds like a no-brainer, but it also sounds like a solution that most people wouldn't even begin to think about. Does it resonate with anybody, that kind of thinking? I love it. It's like three-dimensional chess, but does it resonate with any of you?
I think you've just got to be very, very clever to understand it. It goes over my head, I'm afraid.
Okay. Michael.
Bob, can I just ask you to reiterate that the game changer is to do with suppliers, and that is shortening the lead time from suppliers? Is that right? Or
just in that particular instance, it could be all sorts of things, but usually the game changer is you would think I've either got to increase all my stock or shrink the lead times in all of my stock. And if I've got to pay 10% for all of my purchases, I'm screwed. If you then look at it effectively on an 80-20 rule, which is usually what will happen, you only have to increase the price of the 10%, and then that collapses the amount of stock, because you don't need the stock in other areas. You just generalize, because that's what happens in the world. People generalize.
what do you increase by 10%?
Oh, you're paying a better supplier 10% more, because he's going to deliver it in a much shorter time.
Right. So it comes down to lead times, doesn't it? And if you pay the supplier more, they'll deliver faster. Then we have to consider that the raw material is the least cost, most flexible inventory.
Yeah.
Whereas our work in progress and our finished goods inventory is the most costly and the least flexible.
Yeah, and again, you could look at the difference between your internal lead times and where you hold stock. I'm simplifying it just to make a point, but yes,
I'm just following the concept of inventory, stock holding costs, and lead time. So where you've got most control, you've got little control of your suppliers. You've got most control of your own lead time. So my point being, and this is a core part of as it happens, some of us will know that's what we do. If you can reduce your lead time internally from 3 weeks to 2 or 3 days, right? Then you saved a lot of cost by removing that cash from the working capital, keeping it in the bank. And if you can supply what the customer needs within 2 or 3 days, you don't need much finished goods either.
Yes.
So that you can control.
Absolutely.
What you're trying to do and what we're aiming to do is not minimize, optimize, isn't it?
Yes, optimize the whole rather than a sub level.
Yeah.
But sometimes the long haul in the tent might actually be a purchased product for an assembly item.
Just one example.
Yeah.
So that might help give people more time to think about the thing.
At a sort of broader helicopter view, if you like, it just sounds to me like counterintuitive thinking doesn't come easily to many people, but actually sort of stepping outside the box and looking at it from a different angle can make a whole heap of difference. I don't know if this is resonating with anybody. I'm happy to sort of move on, but I'd love to hear. I personally get a great deal of pleasure out of hearing about things that can be made to work in a completely different way to what I just accepted was the norm. Yeah, I mean, Richard's on his driving away, and hello, Steve. Steve, you got a thought?
Well, no, there was a program on the World Service that unfortunately I missed. But if you think about the normal as I've worked, what is I believe is sort of standard economics, whereby something like the Chinese would make all the cheap, easy stuff that only costs a few pence, and we buy loads of it from them. There was a guy in Germany, and he'd actually worked out that by buying locally, that fundamentally it costs you more, but the detail of being able to work closely and locally with people created so many more opportunities for business growth, for excellence, for customer satisfaction, that it was so much quicker to do. It was worth paying the extra money, even for piece parts and small bits, from localish suppliers.
Yeah, and I think that's the falsehood of, you know, a dispersed supply chain.
Right.
Because the closer you are to your suppliers, the more you understand what they can do for you, the more value they can create for you.
Yeah.
You know, rather than having something where you're paying 6 months before you ever receive it, you're paying 20% down to get it manufactured in China. Then you're paying another 60% when they've shoved it on the ship and 20% when it's landed. And you haven't even received it yet.
Yeah.
Hope it's the right stuff when it arrives.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And if any urgent projects are required where you need more supply, you're more likely to get hold of it from local suppliers rather than expecting more from China, for example.
I think it was a case of it looked at it in detail and it opened up loads of opportunities. Another thing I found routinely is that people try and minimize costs of machine tools and things like that. And I did work in one factory, and Adam would be, I bumped into Adam over this, that the machine tools, I think they were, let's just make some numbers up. They were lasting, say, 50,000 units. And they spent ages trying to get them optimized with this company, and went to a company that really was good at making machine tools. And I think we had to pay something like another 30 quid a tool. So of course there was a lot of kicking and yelling, and but the fact is we were getting something like 450,000 units out of a tool. It basically, with the old supplier, who was a good local jobbing shop, but they weren't precision tool makers, there was a lot of fanning about when you put the tool in, and Joe could set it and Bill had set it. You got it made exactly as per drawing. The price went up, but you got 9 times the amount, 9 times the tool life out of it.
Yeah. I was part of I was part of a really good webinar a couple of weeks ago, actually, which was talking exactly about this. I'll try, if it's all right with you, Nick, I'll try and dig it out and share it with you and let you send it to everyone.
I think some of that with what you're on about there, which I've certainly witnessed in since 2012, working with certain businesses, is that one department may be looking for the solution, that you deliver the solution that is driven by one set of KPIs. Not saying this is it, but this is what I've certainly witnessed. And then purchasing get involved that are driven by another set of KPIs, which is about cost. And you get a conflict, and then things start being taken out. And then, I suppose it's what you pay for. I think the thing for me, the question I ask is that, as Bob's just articulated there around that paradoxical side, is why aren't we applying that thinking more often? Because if as we can see that there is a certain benefit of being, it reminded me a little bit of I watched a film called World War Z with Brad Pitt in it, and they have this thing called the 9th man or 10th man in it, and it's like that. The 10th man side is it throws this curveball in, this different way of thinking that they have to look at. And I did wonder why it is we don't do it so much. I don't know. Is it a lack of understanding, lack of awareness, a lack of knowing?
It's also a bit of it's just practice, habit. I mean, I think it's about that's why I suggested in the email. It's about how do you try to inculcate this in the people you work with, to think differently around these things and think creatively in this 3-dimensional manner. It takes discipline, it takes learning, it takes a lot of reading and understanding and talking to people like Bob about it. But it's just, I find it fascinating. Ram, you were going to say something.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think the reason why we don't do it, despite all the evidence suggesting it is good, goes back to the basic psychology of how our human brains are wired. I mean, we're all aware that, I kind of know this because I'm married to a psychologist. So the point is, we have the left half and the right half of the brain, which is the analytical and the emotional sides. And apparently they don't talk very well to each other. So the analytical side is very good at all the numerics and everything that we do. And the emotional side is all about survival and what next, what next, what next. And that is one of the reasons why we find it very difficult to put language to the way we feel about certain things. You know, when you have an amazing experience, we only come up with words like, oh, it was fantastic, it was amazing. The real experience doesn't come out because the hemispheres don't cross. And that probably also applies here, because analytical brain tells you this will work, but the emotional side is thinking, hang on a minute, how do I trust it? I don't know. I'm not able to picture this together. And more often than not, we follow our hearts rather than our minds in most things that we do. And maybe that's one reason why we find it difficult to do this counterintuitive thinking and work accordingly. It's just a theory I'm throwing out there, open to discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a book at the minute. I've only just started it, which is Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's on about your cognitive ease, cognitive strain, and system 1 and system 2 thinking. And system 1, the intuition, but system 2 is all the calculation, everything like that. But it's bloody lazy. So it will take the shortcut. Perhaps that's what we're doing. I don't know.
Yeah, and your brain is easy, and that's why it needs a challenge. And I think that paradox thing is actually the biggest thing to come out of that. Is it creates a challenge, it creates a tension. And I don't mean attention, A-double-T, I mean A-T-E-N-S-O-N, so tension. And I think, I mean, I've been lucky in the sense, right from day one in my industrial career, I was, you know, I've lived with leaders who've challenged the hell out of the business, I've challenged the hell out of me. Adam might say I've lived that in the way that I've led. But when Adam and I worked together, we had a very simple premise of what the business stood for. And the 3 core elements we stood on was A, we were number 1 about creating value, number 2 about busting paradigms, and number 3 about leading our customer. Not the customer leading us, but us leading the customer. We actually wanted to make sure that we understood our customer as good as they did, if not better, so that we could actually lead them to far more greater value solutions than they were currently aware of. And so those 3 premises of customer leading, value creation, and paradigm busting was the premise of our business.
I mean, some of the things that, to give you, it may be in the same, but I mean, because I was an engineer, but we're working with Bob, and we're at one of the Limreed sites at Redditch, and we revamped the manufacturing shop floor there over a week period, doing a Kaizen event. But in there, we actually started thinking around having the team leader dealing direct with the customer instead of, so the customer coming direct to the team leader and missing everybody out. And we started investigating that sort of routes and that sort of thing around the customer side. You know, it was a complete shift in the thought processes around it as well. And Bob, again, with the theory of constraints and applying that, he was getting us to shift our thought processes around it as well. So I was brought up with it with Bob at an early stage, working with him. It's I think
a typical thing that people like Adam did was when 9/11 happened, 75% of our business, because we were aerospace, just disappeared overnight. And as Adam has just said, we used to do Kaizen events, which we thought were pretty good, that would take a week long. So we had this stupid idea that said, if it takes us a week, we can only do 50 a year. What if we could do 50 in a week? And these guys invented a 1-hour Kaizen blitz. Oh. And that totally transformed our productivity and allowed us to take the cuts we needed to take in operations. And we put that money into sales, marketing, and engineering, so that when everybody else was cutting all their costs in their selling, we actually had salespeople with customers, we had engineers solving problems with customers, and we won 100% of the Dreamliner and 50% of A380. We'd only have a 125% share with Airbus before. So those are the kinds of things. There are lots of other things that went on around it, but that's the kind of thing that can happen when you have that. I don't know, it's a mindset of an explorer, really, a challenger and explorer. I don't know whether that helps.
And I think, because I was thinking around this, when I was reading this book, There's thinking fast and slow, and they've got these little examples in there. As I was reading the questions they were asking, I was already trying to problem solve some of it. Now it may be, and I think that is inbuilt in us as engineers. I think that problem solving side. So, and perhaps we just need to hone it a little bit more.
But there's also though, isn't it? Something I've found fascinating is the right-left brain balance question. All engineers have got a very strong left brain. By definition, you have to have a very strong left brain to be an engineer. But at the same time, problem solvers very frequently have a very strong right brain, which leads to a situation where an awful lot of engineers have actually got a fairly balanced, in the 45-55% range, left and right brain. Because they're not, computer programmers very frequently are almost entirely left brain. Like, 75-80% rather than 45-50, because it's a thoroughly and completely structured environment, and they rely on other people to design the product. How many times have we seen a software product that's been built by a software engineer who hasn't got a clue what it needs to look like? Right, so the user interface looks horrible. The program might work beautifully, but it looks horrible because no one with a right brain actually had any involvement in looking at it. And so the paradigm busting environment comes from a degree of creativity, but it's creativity that's applied in a very structured and practical way, driven by the predominantly left brain knowledge and experience and expertise. And so that balance is what ends up creating the innovative ideas of doing 50 in a week instead of one every week kind of approach.
Yeah. The brain bits is also very critical. If you really truly want to get into understanding what's possible, you need to, people run business. People, I'm very big people oriented. And if you're going to understand what's going on and how you create value, you need to build relationships with people. And therefore, that's where the brain bit comes in. And building relationships with people and building credibility with people gives you deeper insights. Deeper insights gives you greater possibilities, lots of variations, which if you can then feed that into creativity, gives you a much, much bigger potential for a solution. So the both parts of the brain and how they work are critical.
And it also builds into your team building, recruitment, training environment, in that every business needs the person that can do the same job day in, day out, absolutely spot on, no problem at all. Just don't ask them to do something different unless you're going to train them how to do it. Then at the same time, you need the other person who, once they've done that one task 5 times, is going to get bored with it, because they know how to do that now and they want to move on to the next thing. But you need that whole balance across. And then when you find that you've got gaps, you've got to identify training mechanisms to fill the gaps with the people that you've got, or recruit different people to fill those gaps.
Yeah, and sometimes in giving people a challenge, you'll be amazed at how well they train themselves.
Oh no, it is. It really is quite. It's fascinating, invigorating.
That's when the magic happens.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is a lot of us work remotely at the moment, and a lot of us actually are in sort of one-person businesses as well. It's how to challenge ourselves, as we're sitting in our home offices. I'm wondering again. We've had this conversation before, but to what extent does the absence of people daily, hourly in the same room, pressure cooking, throwing things around, challenging each other, in the absence of that possibility, are we missing out on creativity? Are we missing out on building better businesses? Hopefully this is all going to be moot in about 9 months' time or whatever it's going to take. But I just wonder whether you have to have people around you to make this kind of creative thinking work.
Well,
think
I
it
think,
helps.
I think
Yeah,
that's true, because typically anything I've participated in is to how much engineering you do in a week. I typically reckon your manufacturing process engineers, you're lucky if you get 8 hours proper process engineering out of them. The rest of the week is doing corporate junk, all sorts of odd things. I think benchmark South Korea, where they reckon they get 16 hours a week out of them. So the fact is, in that other 32 hours a week, you will be doing a certain amount of, strategic stuff for, what color white should the lines in the car park be and all that corporate nonsense. But because that gets boring, you hang around with a few mates and see what you can do, I mean, I'll give you an example. Once when I worked at DEC, we were challenged with giving a 200 megahertz processor, and my boss and my boss's boss were in their office arguing about it. So I was so fed up with listening to them after half an hour, because it wouldn't be possible unless this. So actually, I had a pretty good idea. We knew it, and I organized 3 people, and before they finished arguing about it, we had a plan that we could implement from Monday morning on how to do it. And we basically put it them and ran off for the pub. So my point is that actually having the people there together, they will do a certain amount of junk that corporations have to do, but they will get bored and they will find something useful to do. They will find that creative thing to do, and they will do something because they'll say, what about that customer that was moaning about whatever it is? What could we do? And, if 1% of the things work out, it's like Adam says, if 1% of them work out and you're fairly quick at doing them, you'll be making money and nobody will understand why, but it's good fun.
We'll get and do innovative. A few people will get and do innovative things like that. Steve, looking to unblock more people into more creative and innovative things. Where we're talking in these times now of digitization, automation, how many people are actually spending hours and hours and hours working with spreadsheets? Hardly anybody understands except them. It takes them all the time to manage them, when a lot of that work can be automated. There are ways of copying all that done, say for order entry or invoicing. How many screens do you need? How many clicks do you need? How many different pages do you need to put it together to release an invoice? That can all be copied and given over to a robot, electronic robot, then free up the person who was doing that, who had lots of knowledge, locked into boring, monotonous work, release them into innovative work because they've got the knowledge and the expertise locked up in a spreadsheet at the moment. More people to do more innovation, automation.
I find it routine. I mean, okay, I sell software for a living. I don't sell an awful lot because it's like a subsidiary activity. But if you look at stuff like failure modes and effects analysis, people make that software in Excel, which is okay if you've got 2 or 3. But when you end up with 50 or 60, you end up paying somebody to run the system that could be run just by itself. There's just software to do it, but actually, trying to get any traction with people over a lot of this stuff, it's a bit like talking Swahili. You might as well be talking a different language, and you just say to the people, your Six Sigma isn't very Six Sigma. Basically, it's got so much waste built into it. You should be, physicians should be healing yourself. But it is difficult to get people to improve some of those internal processes, particularly with Excel, because it's like the binding twine, isn't it, of binding twine of industry. It holds everything together.
Binding twine is a good expression. Excel hell. We've become Excel junkies in a sense, and the software, the kind of software we're talking about here, moved on a couple of generations over the last few years. So people should be more open to get rid of the Excel. Anybody leaves, they leave their spreadsheets behind. Nobody understands them anymore. It's that exotic. when that penny will drop is maybe during these COVID days now, when people think, what in the world is all this anyway?
I actually made quite a lot of money in the period 2003 to 2007. I was working for a big pharmaceutical company, and pretty much the only thing I was doing was deconstructing their forecasting spreadsheets that other people had built. They needed to know how they worked. And so all I did was spending my time backtracking through Excel. But yeah, I think the thing about things like Excel is that people believe, they know that they know that Excel can do the job. They know that they can work Excel. Therefore, they think that they can do the job in Excel. Right? Yeah. No, that's seriously, that's what happens. And sometimes, somewhere between 3 and 6 months later, they realize that third step they can't do. But yeah,
I think if we to think about that paradox thing you started off with, Nick, is that as a, I've had the benefit and the privilege over the last 12 years to be a TMMX judge. And so I get to see the best factories that present themselves in the UK as well. The real ones that are way out often are contrarian to anyone else. So when we talk about best practice, they don't implement best practice, they implement their own unique, peculiar, odd practice. For example, there's a company called Gripple that have won a number of the TMMX things over a number of years. And when I first visited them, they had 17 values up on the wall. And, if you read anything or whatever else, the rule of 3 to 7, you should have 3 to 7 things because people will remember them. So I was kind of curious, 17, what the hell, how the hell would you remember them? So one guy stood up and said, bah, 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 and rattled off the 17. So I said, well, that's great, but what the heck do they mean? And he gave me an example of something that happened and how he implemented the value for every, okay, all right, I understand. So the last time I went to Gripple, another thing you tend to be gifted of the sense of values is that they should be aligned. You go in to a business and they're consistent through the business. So we go and see 3 different sites and they've got 3 different sets of values. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute. So, okay, now what's the idea behind this one? And the idea is that they want full ownership of that unit by that unit. They don't want it to be imposed upon by anyone else. They want that ownership. So they decide what their own values is of that business unit, which might be very different from the one next door, might be very different from the one next door. Now there might be some alignment if they are supplier customers, but within the organization. But otherwise they're free to choose, and that freedom gives them a huge level of ownership.
Yeah, well, talking about ownership, Bob, I mean, the fact of the matter is the employees own the company. The guy who started it was a wire salesman, and he developed a way of just basically twisting wire and fixing it.
The wire. Yeah.
I mean, now you'll find Gripple products in suspending ceilings in gigantic buildings, all that sort of thing. And he said, well, I've got enough. I'm going to give the company to the employees. And it's one of the most amazing places there is. Listen, I wanted to tell a story. Richard, I know you're listening, but you're focusing on your driving in your Tesla Ludicrous at 5,000 miles on the way up to Glasgow. The story of your dust extractor, to me, is illustrative of the paradox at play. Do you mind if I tell the story and briefly, and then you could fill in the details? I just want to couch it in the way that perhaps sort of puts it in terms of the paradox. Guys, Richard runs Crystal Doors in Rochdale, and makers of anything from kitchen and kitchen units and all that, vinyl wrapped doors basically, but supplies products right across schools, hospitals, prisons, that kind of thing. Very successful business. He was presented with a paradox, which was that his dust extractor had to be replaced. And he's going to correct me if I get anything wrong here. And the paradox of this was that the council was insisting on a level of environmental safety or cleanliness. And he had to get a new dust extractor, but he couldn't prove to them how, that it was working to the levels they wanted. The alternative was to have to move to a different factory site. So there he was, he had to either move, which cost a fortune, or buy a dust extractor that wouldn't provide the kind of data that the council wanted to prove his environmental credentials. And so he had to bust the paradigm or the paradox. I'm not certain which one it was, Bob, but you'll tell us later. He went to California to meet with a company that actually added sensors to a dust extractor in such a way that he could get real-time data and thereby keep his factory, pay way over the odds probably, I'm sure, Richard, you'll agree with that, for the dust extractor, but it meant he could stay in business on location, keep the council happy, keep the community clean, and it was a win-win all round. Have I got that right, Richard?
Absolutely spot on, Nick. Well done. A perfect story. It is true. Yeah, normally you just have LEV testing once a year. Ours is literally running 24/7, so we've got the whole data to prove that we've got clean air constantly. The main one was the extra sensor that we put in, which gave us our first digital twin, and that allows us then to sort of say that whatever happens, the machine will be able to respond to it immediately. So therefore, the risk to the environment was nil. And obviously, when they came in the first barrage of questions of what are you going to do if this happens, the answers just came flooding back straight away. This is how it's going to be resolved. It's automatic and it will be resolved. And they were like, well, we have to then pass planning permission, which was absolutely incredible. But yeah, sometimes in life we do have amazing challenges. And I think this is where manufacturers, with the left-hand side of the brain and the right-hand side of the brain, we've got that understanding of how to engineer and have that ingenuity. But at the same time, we've then got that ability to be able to then bring it to market.
Fantastic. I mean, I just love that story because it's so easy to say, well, I'm stuck. I'm either way. I've painted myself into a corner. And Richard found a way, or created the way out of the dilemma and the paradox, and blew it wide apart, and is going on to even greater heights. And Richard, I think that are you close to carbon net zero on process, or you're there?
Scope 1, 2 and all sections of Scope 3 will be by 2022. The amount of offsetting that we'll be doing will be less than the 20%. So normally you try to do 4 years minimum of reductions. We've now got 75% of our energy on-site generated, which is absolutely fantastic. And the building is carbon positive.
Well, that's brilliant news. And again, that's down to positive creative thinking and an absolute desire to make it happen and make it come about. Alec, good evening to you. Last time we heard from you, you were the one driving at 1,000,000 miles an hour up a motorway. How are you?
I'm all right. I've just got back from Sheffield, so apologies for my lateness.
Oh no, it's great to see you. And Alec, of course, will be registering for the Kaizen Members Hub, which has been my...
What? I think I did today, didn't I?
Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, that's brilliant. I've got my young designer is putting it all together. Alec, I know that I'm not certain, you haven't been able to listen to any of the conversation. We've been talking about how apparent paradoxes that we're confronted with in business can sometimes make us, can either make us just retreat or fold or just give in to them, or can find a creative way of busting the paradox or busting the paradigm, as Bob Gibbon put it. Have you ever been put in a situation where you've got a dilemma? The answer doesn't seem immediately apparent, but you've managed to use a creative either engineering solution or a business practice process solution to get yourself out of it?
I would say virtually every day that happens in our world. So I think the most recent one probably is the COVID thing with where we instantly, obviously our business is international, we couldn't travel. So we are running a project right now to use Microsoft HoloLens as a means to remotely commission machines without us having to be there. So it's, you know, I think it's about your whole creativity. Do you see a block or do you see a way around the block? And that's in your programming, I think. Some people do, some people don't. We always see the opportunity, not the problem.
I suppose that's at its most basic. That is that's the positive mindset. It was just fascinating that sometimes the answers in 2 dimensions seem not to resolve anything. But if you can think 3-dimensionally, you often come out with a positive and indeed much better result for you and the customer. Who hasn't had a contribution today and who'd like to say something? Sam, I'm going to put you on the spot because you work very closely with a lot of companies. I mean, you're building Connex network, the Connex portal, and I think that clearly, what you're trying to do is not just connect engineers together, but also try and make life more positive for them and help them get better results out of what they're doing and the relationships they have with others. So fill us in a bit on that.
Interesting couple of months ahead with some exciting developments actually, which is going to be quite good. So yeah, we've basically built a platform, kind of digital hub for manufacturers to collaborate and connect with one another. The big thing that myself and you, Nick, have been pushing is getting people to actually shout about what they're good at, and you know, when they've got a good news story to tell, actually telling people that they're doing it, and you know, and kind of pushing that word out a little bit more, and that's what we're working to achieve. And again, going back to the face-to-face connections and the conversations that could be you know, there's not a lot is going on, to be frank, at the minute, and we're just trying to make that process a little bit easier and get companies talking to each other and start these collaborative projects and start those conversations. A lot of what we're focusing on is the innovators and the individuals with new product ideas and helping them get them to market quicker through various means of this new hub that we're developing, which I'm going to talk to you about tomorrow, if that's okay. Yeah, so as I say, it's just a bit more of an area for people to collaborate and discuss and grow their network and learn about what each other can do. And because you literally do not know who's on your doorstep until you go out and start looking. And that's what the message we're trying to get across.
That brings us back to an earlier part of the conversation was about the fact that it may cost you more to work with local suppliers, but the benefit and in the end the profitability could be heightened, even though the actual cash outlay may be greater. This was one of the arguments that a lot of people have been making for reshoring, onshoring production, that although you may end up paying a greater per component piece, the opportunities for greater service, efficiency, and so on are legion compared with having a very long, extended, fragile supply chain. In many ways, it harks back to what I was talking about last week and Siemens Congleton and the extraordinary pressure cooker they had there, where they were stuck with a paradox. They needed to up their productivity, but they had no way to expand space. They'd reached the end of just about every tether that they had, and yet they still managed through digital means to develop better customer service, faster production times, and so they remain in business with the same number of people, about 400 people, but turning out, I don't know, I forget the multiplication, but it's huge compared with what they were doing 15, 20 years ago. And that is all about, as I say, this creative thinking when the pressure is on and you're confronted with the paradox, it's saying, right, well, we now have to perhaps reinvent some of the things we do in order to make it all happen. And a lot of the way they made it happen actually was by redesigning their factory floor using digital twinning. I find digital twinning absolutely wonderful, and great to hear you're using it, Alec. Others are using it, and it's a fascinating technology. Anybody else here got an experience with digital twinning? No. Does everybody know what it is? Yeah, Rowan, please.
I was going to ask, what is it? Is it just a live simulation?
Well,
yeah,
it's a feedback. Well, Rowan, you know better than I, because you were at Hitachi, and that isn't that part of your game?
I was actually at Microsoft before that, so you know what Alec was saying about HoloLens is essentially part of the core, one of the core reasons why digital twinning was, you know, why HoloLens was created, was for digital twinning. Essentially, it's creating a virtual model of the physical product or machine to be able to do different things. So I had the pleasure of running an event with HoloLens at Worcester Bosch's factory. And essentially the use case that we were presenting to them was for their service engineers to have HoloLens devices out on when they're at a call with the customer, and essentially wear the HoloLens device, one, so that the agents back in headquarters could see exactly what the engineer was seeing, but also as a secondary, they would have 3D models of all the different types of boilers that they had stored in the HoloLens, and they'd be able to see essentially what parts were broken, and then also see tutorials on how to fix certain parts if they weren't an expert on that particular model. So essentially empowering the engineer at the site to be able to do their job more efficiently.
The difference between what Rowan's talking about and just, you know, having a sort of design model is that everything is data connected. So you're actually inputting data from the real world into the modeling, so that you can see what changes you're making in the digital twin. If you change the data, you'll change the twin. And Siemens were using for things as so ordinary as just how to build a production cell, how to build it optimally, and they optimized it in the digital twin, which then went to create the real world thing. So they could design the entire factory without having to move anything around. They optimized it and then put everything in place. And it is all about the feedback loop of data that enables you to do that. And so now, as Rowan said, machines are feeding the data, and eventually you just build this digital picture of what's happening over there, but you've got it right in front of you on a virtual reality screen. Absolutely.
There was a really powerful story, Nick, that HoloLens created, which was a power station in Dubai. So you put the HoloLens on, you launch it, and it would have live feed data from a power station in Dubai. And you could see everything was green. It was all powered by Power BI and real life data and sensors that were measuring things as you go. And as soon as an alert popped up, you could click onto it and it would zoom into that particular part of the factory, and you could see, okay, this part's overheating, maybe we could turn that down a little bit, or change something, or add some more cooling, you know, here, stuff like that. So it is, like you said, fed by real data, and it essentially allows your operations guys also to see what's going on at a macro scale and quickly react to any changes.
Yeah.
Okay, so dinosaurs like me, then it sounds like it's real-time simulation, which takes real data and shows you exactly what's happening.
Yeah,
in real, and it'll show you digitally.
I think it's even more powerful than that. What I've seen with Siemens, for example, you can make a very simple object like a rubber ball. They will create a digital model of a rubber ball. That ball will bounce. You can tap something and the ball will bounce harder. The harder you tap it, it'll go in a different direction. It is real rubber ball, but it's digital. do everything that therefore you can manage a robot to pick them up, drop whatever, simulate the whole thing, but a real simulation, you might say. So much more than
that's right. Simulation is applies dissimulation, which of course it isn't. It is real, but virtual. This is where language starts to defeat us, because we start going around in circles again. We're getting close. Yeah. We're getting, actually, on our website, ukmfgmedia.com, the main picture is of, I think it's a bunch of turbines. Somebody's going to correct me about that, but they've overlaid the digital twin of it. That's part why I chose that picture for our website, because that is a digital twin. We're approaching the witching hour. Anybody got any more comments? Richard, I hope you're driving safely. Where are you going to? Glasgow?
I booked it in last year for COP26, and obviously COP26 has been cancelled. But it's great to see that obviously the manufacturer are more than capable of running a virtual event, and there should be a virtual event of COP26. Because obviously the time for obviously climate emergency is an emergency. So for them to delay it a year, I thought I'm going to stay with the apartment. So I'm going up as a film company. So it's an essential journey. And the students are doing the protest this year for obviously the lack of commitment that governments are making. So I'm going to try and do quite a few videos and start my own YouTube channel.
Oh, we look forward to seeing that. Yeah, keep us up to date with that, Richard, because that'll be great. I think COP26 is taking place, but it's not taking place till June. Am I correct in saying something like that?
That's correct, yes. They delayed it.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, folks, thank you very much indeed, as always, for being with us. I really appreciate it. Mark, I understand you. Oh, yeah, there is. Mark, I understand you had a problem uploading. If you could just try uploading a picture of yourself, because it is designed, the hub, members hub is designed to let everybody see each other. So if anybody new comes along, they can have that on the side, and they can see what everybody does. Because actually, this week is kind of tricky, because there are lots of digital events going on. The manufacturers running Digital Manufacturing Week, and it's taking a lot of people out of action. But we're getting close to 50 on our roster, and by the time that starts fleshing out, it's going to start getting busy, and we're going to, we all get to know each other on evenings like this. But there are going to be an awful lot of new people coming in over the course of the next few weeks. So I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. I hope you all have a wonderful week. The door's always open. That's because somebody nicked it. No, the door's always open. It's always a great day. Say what?
Richard will give you a new one.
Absolutely.
Well, he might sell you a new one.
Well, listen, have a great week. Enjoy yourselves. I hope your businesses thrive. I hope you remain safe, prosperous, and the page, that Members Hub, all your details as you gradually populate that page, you'll know how to get hold of each other instead of having to nudge me to pass on email addresses and things. And I look forward very much to seeing you next week. So cheerio.
Everybody have a good weekend.